Hello and welcome to the next lesson on thematic studies. Today we are going to be looking at crime and punishment, one of the most popular themes for people to study, so I thought I'd cover this one next. And to jump straight in, we need to look at then different examples of crime that are recognised by the exam board. Now, one of the most common one that is asked about in exam questions is this one here of theft. Taking something that doesn't belong to you. We also have the example of murder, which can be contrasted with manslaughter. Now, murder is just taking somebody's life with the intention of doing so, whereas manslaughter, the difference between the two there is that manslaughter is taking somebody's life without the intention of doing so. So if it's an accidental death, you've done something and someone has died, but you had no intention on causing their death, that could be considered manslaughter. And finally, then we have this example of civil unrest. Now, this could be just protesting peacefully. This could be rioting. Now, different people are going to have different views on whether civil unrest should be allowed. The question is, though, are these crimes always going to be bad? Because we ask the question, well, is stealing food to help feed a starving family, is that bad? Is killing one person to save hundreds of lives, is that bad? What about what Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks did? Were they bad? Now, the answer to those questions usually will end up being no, that's not necessarily bad. Now, it may have a few legal issues, especially killing one person to save hundreds, but the general idea is that you're doing so with good intention. So if a questioner came up looking at the religious views on people who have murdered or people who have stolen or people who have protested and have broken the law that way, you could always use the examples of, well, actually, they're going to sometimes be okay with these things. The actions themselves are bad, however, if done with good intention, might be less bad, especially when looking at what Martin Luther King Jr. did and Rosa Parks. Martin Luther King gathering thousands of people in protests for racial equality, saw him land himself in prison. This was a man who was a Baptist priest, and he ended up in prison for his beliefs. Rosa Parks ended up in prison for refusing to move bus seats. So because of the fact that she was a black woman sitting in a black section of a bus, when the white section was filled out and they needed more seats for white people, the black people were expected to give up their seats. So Rosa Parks in that time technically broke the law. However, she did so with somewhat valid reason. Now, we need to look at why it is that people break the law in the first place. Now, the first one could be your upbringing. So in a situation where you have parents who have criminal activities, you might be likely to pick up those behaviours. Or if your parents have raised you with a certain viewpoint, you may then have characteristics or behaviours that support those viewpoints, which can in some cases lead to people committing crimes. However, one of the more common reasons is that people get desperate. They're hanging on for dear life in terms of whatever it might be that they're struggling with. Maybe they have an addiction of some sort, or maybe they just can't afford the basics in life and they're struggling financially. This can lead people to do things that they wouldn't normally do, and they're only doing so because of their desperation, how desperate they are to get out of the situation that they're in. You could also have addiction as itself. The use of drugs can not only be illegal because, well, the possession of drugs is illegal. It can also make your mind work differently, leading you to commit crimes and break the law. But also the addiction itself can lead you to commit more crimes. If you can't afford, for example, your fix of drugs, and you therefore are going to need to find a way to pay for it. You might decide to go and steal or do something that will gain you money that might be illegal in order to pay for your drugs. But also, just because of hatred, some people are just that angry that they can't see anything else to do with their lives other than to spread hatred and aggression towards other people. Now, the religious responses then to the people who commit crimes is that we should treat them with love and respect. As we see here in Love Thy Neighbour, that famous quote that everybody uses, please do keep using it, by the way, guys, it is a very valid quote to use. No matter what the person's done, no matter who they are, they're still going to be our neighbour. Now, in the parable of the sheep and the goats, it suggests that, when we see people who are struggling, we should stop and help. So when we see people starting to go down the wrong path, starting to move towards a life of crime, we should try and pull them back. We should try and gain them back onto the right path and support them in overcoming their addiction, helping them financially so they don't have to feel so desperate. We then see that the parable of the Good Samaritan pops up, and this is again just an opportunity to help those, not only the people who are likely to end up committing crimes, but also the victims of crimes as well. Finally, then, we see evil people will surely be punished, but the children of God will go free. This idea then that if you do evil acts, this is going to be a bad thing. So if you do things purely out of hatred, purely out of anger, that is not going to be something that's good. It's going to be punished. But those who live a life, who are spreading love and positivity and help other people, especially when those people are in a dark place themselves, those people are not only going to go free, but they're going to be able to go to heaven and be with God in the afterlife. Now, if an exam question came up saying, describe why a religious person might break the law, there's lots of things you need to focus on here. Firstly, you could speak about the fact that actually, although religious people have religious beliefs, as it says there in that final sentence, it doesn't mean that they aren't human. So as we spoke about when we looked at Christian practices and Islam practices, there are going to be those things that occur that happen in day-to-day life that just happen because people are people, not because anyone has a particular belief. Somebody who is a member of a church is just as likely to steal as somebody who isn't a member of a church, because at the end of the day, human nature is the thing that controls us. So for many non-religious people, or many religious people, they may end up doing similar sort of actions. But when looking at this example answer that has been written, we can see it's broken into 3 sections. The first one coming here, some Christians may break the law because they have an addiction. Okay, so where does it go from there? It says, they might do things that are unlawful, such as stealing. So because of this addiction, they might decide to steal. We're describing why it is that addiction can cause them to steal. And again here, this final bit of development, it doesn't mean they're not human. They can still get addicted to things. Christians are just as likely to be addicted to alcohol as someone who isn't a Christian. In fact, it could even be argued that they're going to have an even bigger problem with alcohol, considering it's used in Holy Communion on at least a monthly basis. That is going to be something that could be a real issue. Now, although I say this in jest, I mean it almost seriously. It can be a case of religious people have just as much issue with addiction, just as much issues with other big world problems that everyday people face. And the reason for that is because although they have these religious beliefs, they are still human beings. So if you want to use this as an example answer, do feel free to write it down. I will be moving on in 3, 2, and 1. So now we need to look at the aims of punishment. And the first aim of punishment we're going to look at is this idea of reformation. And this is the idea to try and change someone for the better. And this can be done lots of ways. If you are already been imprisoned, you might be offered counselling or therapy to help get you through whatever has caused you to commit the crime in the first place. If you have an issue such as kleptomania, for example, which is a mental health condition which is a compulsion to steal, it could be that through counselling and therapy that you can overcome that mental illness. As well as if you have an anger problem and that has caused you to do a violent crime, offering counselling or therapy has an opportunity then for that person to redeem themselves, make themselves a better person, to reform their mental state. But also, one of the big problems that we face in countries with high reoffending rates is that people who commit crimes tend to have low forms of education, lacking qualifications to get them into mainstream jobs, which then means that they have to resort to crime in order to be able to pay their bills. So some places decide they're going to help their prisoners get qualifications. These are what we call NVQs. But also, it can just be teaching new life skills. It could be that this person hasn't had the correct setup, they've not had the right upbringing, and therefore need new life skills, whether it be in terms of how to communicate with other people, whether it be what is seen as socially acceptable or unacceptable. However, you then also have punishments which go completely outside of the prison system altogether. This idea of community service is a lesser form of punishment for lesser crimes, but is focused on reformation because it forces you to work within the community. Now, the reason it works so well is that it makes you feel like you have a purpose and gives you some sort of belonging. People who commit petty crimes, who end up with community service, don't tend to feel a belonging to a community. So having the opportunity to give back and put something out into the community, whether it be building a garden, doing some farm work, planting some trees, whatever it might be, they are going to feel a lot better about themselves because they've been seen to be working hard for their community. They'll feel more respected. That will help them feel more integrated within society. And then it's going to be much easier for them to go out and get that normal job that everyone else has. And not continue living a life of crime. Now, obviously, this is going to be supported by Christians on the basis that it encourages forgiveness and helping people. So it encourages forgiveness because you're looking past what it is that the person has done and you want to help them move forward into a new future. So you have to forgive people in order to be able to work with them. Because otherwise you're going to see a whole load of people who've committed awful crimes. You're not going to want to help any of them. There has to be that element of forgiveness first, and then you can help them. Not only you need to forgive those people, but also it's encouraged for those people to forgive themselves of the crimes they've committed in order for them to actually accept moving forward. Next, we have this idea of deterrence. Now, some punishments are put in place to frighten people into not wanting to commit crimes in the first place. Now, there's all sorts of ways that people are put off from committing crimes that aren't necessarily a punishment. For example, CCTV existing. When people see that there are cameras about, they're less likely to commit crimes. In the same way that you guys at home, whilst you're working, you are far less likely to get distracted by going on your phone when you're working if your parents are sat right next to you. If you're alone in your room, the temptation to start doing things you know aren't good for you start to arise. However, one of the big examples that we do use in day-to-day society would be big fines and long prison sentences. So, for example, if you litter in an area of outstanding natural beauty, you can get charged over £1,000. Now, as a result of knowledge of that charge, a lot of people, therefore, are going to avoid littering in those areas to avoid those charges. Now, for some people, they don't see big fines necessarily as a deterrent, because actually sanctioning those fines and putting them in place can be a real challenge. However, long prison sentences surely can be a deterrent. People don't want to lose the majority of their life. They want to be able to continue going out and about, seeing their friends, watching their family grow, so they're not going to want to spend huge amounts of time in prison. However, in some parts of the world, physical punishments and even death can be used as a form of punishment. Now, this is going to make people not want to commit crimes because obviously they're not going to want to experience pain. They're obviously not going to want to die unless they have some sort of mental health condition, in which case, the better form of punishment might be focusing on that reformative form of punishment, trying to seek that help, seeking that therapy. But these are punishments which can put people off from committing crimes in the first place. And for religious people, there is a big punishment, which is going to be the biggest deterrence, which is this concept of hell. So in Christianity, they've got hell. In Islam, they've got Jahannam. All sorts of different religions have different concepts of this negative place that you go to if you do not fit in with those rules that are given by the religion. Some Muslims and some Christians are going to agree with this use of deterrence as an aim of punishment. Christians might accept big fines and long sentences. They're more likely to accept those forms of deterrence. However, Christians are less likely to accept physical punishment and death unless they focus more so on the Old Testament. If they are a fundamental Christian, you may find that they do have some acceptance of using physical forms of punishment as a way to, uh, you know, help their children become more mature, helping them learn their lessons, because that's the focus of punishment, is so you learn from mistakes. So for some Christians are going to accept these sort of deterrent forms of punishment. However, this is more going to be supported by Muslims. Okay, which leads us then on to the final aim of punishment, which is retribution, effectively taking revenge. So when someone has done something wrong, the person who has been wronged has the opportunity then to seek some sort of revenge. Now, this could be punishments that are fitting the crime. So if somebody has stolen a high valued item, they might be able to claim a high valued item from that person. However, it could go to the extreme of, let's say, one person kills one family member from another family. That family then may want to kill one family member from your family. And it can go backwards and forwards continuously, as well again as using these physical forms of punishment. Now, this is going to be more supported by Muslims in accordance with Sharia law. In Islamic countries, the death penalty and physical punishments are seen often as long as certain criteria have been met. For example, I spoke earlier about the the religious views on people who steal. Now, depending on the criteria, if you steal in an Islamic country, the punishment is to have your hand cut off. That stops you then from being able to steal again, because your hand can't then pick up that item. So that's a form of revenge. It's supporting the victim. It makes them feel valued. It makes them feel important, whilst also getting a sense of satisfaction knowing that the person who has wronged them has also faced that same pain. The problem here for Christians, for example, is that this isn't the most loving thing to do. When Jesus taught to love thy neighbour and to love your enemies, this isn't exactly what he had in mind. Very quickly, let's see if we can remember then, what are the three different aims of punishment? I'm going to give you this time now to pause the video. I'm going to reveal the answers in 3, 2, and 1. The answers were retribution, reformation, and deterrence. Now, when it comes to looking at religious evidence that you could use to support each of these ideas, we come to this table here. What I have done is I have given you a list of quotations or parables that Jesus taught, for example, as well as their references to where you can find them in their respective holy books that support these different ideas. So if we start off by looking at Reformation, we see that idea of love thy neighbour, this idea of the Good Samaritan, wanting to help those, even if they are your enemy, even if they're people that you don't like, even if they're people that you disagree with, you should still aim to help them no matter what. As well as then this quote from the Hadith, we are all as equal as teeth on a comb, suggesting that because we are all equal, we should all be treated the same way. Now, as a result of this, a criminal, therefore, is going to need to be treated the same way that you would want to be treated. That means you need to treat them with respect. And the only way you can do that is through a reformative aim of punishment. Whereas we see then in the deterrence column, we see there cut off the hands of thieves. And this is a quote that comes directly from the Quran, is part of Sharia law, and is implemented in Islamic countries. Now, as I said, this does need to meet a set of criteria. I think there's about 50 odd rules that it needs to fit before that punishment can actually be given. However, this is an actual punishment that is given out to people who steal. Lash them with 100 lashes refers to adultery. So when you cheat on your partner, it causes their heart to ache. It causes heartache. So what ends up happening is they get lashed to sort of resemble that same pain that you cause and the scars that it sometimes bear. However, there is also this idea of never to avenge yourself. Punishment shouldn't be for taking revenge, but should be to allow for something worse to happen. Now, in terms of power, humans are powerful to an extent, but God is even more powerful. Now, this quotation here supports the idea of deterrence, because if you know that God is going to punish you when you do something wrong, we see in the Bible several times where people have their families taken away from them, people get killed. You know, God flooded the entire world just to get rid of sinners and killed everybody on the planet. God's wrath is extremely powerful, which can act as a deterrent to many people. We then see very similar ideas, very similar quotes then, looking at retribution, of the cut off the hands of thieves and lash them 100 lashes. But then we see down here, whoever kills a man shall be killed by a man. This can be found in the book of Genesis. This is shortly after the conflict between Cain and Abel, the two children of Adam and Eve. This idea then that if you kill someone, you should have the same happen to you, is supported in the Bible. Now, this is an Old Testament belief, and as I said, if they are more of a liberal Christian who focuses more on the teachings of Jesus rather than the fundamental truths of what it says in the Bible according to Christians, then you're gonna avoid these ideas. However, if you are that more traditional Christian, if you do have those fundamental beliefs, more like Catholic beliefs, you are going to see these ideas shine through. Now we need to look at the two big types of punishment. Now, obviously, we have prison sentences, which we have somewhat already spoken about. We've also got these ideas of corporal and capital punishment. Now, corporal punishment is causing pain or injury linking to the crime, whereas capital punishment is another word for the death penalty. Now, often people will get these two confused. It's really important that you do not. Corporal punishment and capital punishment are not the same thing. Corporal punishment does not cause your death. Capital punishment does. Corporal punishment just causes you to feel elements of pain. However, in situations, for example, if you were to have your hand cut off, although this is done in public, it is done very safely. A tourniquet is used to ensure that there's no blood loss. They do everything cleanly to ensure that nobody's actually going to die from these punishments. Whereas capital punishment, the intention is to cause death rather than just cause harm. So having a distinction between the two is really, really important. Now, this is an example of deterrence. And which other aim of punishment? I'm going to give you a second to have a think about it, and I want you to say it to the screen in 3, 2, and 1. The answer you should have come up with, and the answer you should have said out loud, is this idea of retribution, seeking revenge. Whereas we then also have community service. Now, community service could be a wide variety of things. As I said, it is done for lesser crimes. It could be litter picking, it could be making community gardens, planting trees, whatever it is that the community needs in that time. Whereas MVQs is what we refer to as a national vocational qualification. So if you are already in prison, this is something that is offered to you as a way to get new life skills, as well as more qualifications. It could just be that you need your English and maths to be able to get the job, or you want more trained specific skills. Now, in many prisons across the UK, they've started opening up different ways of providing these MVQs. Specifically, a few prisons have started these chain of restaurants called the Clink. This is where they gather their entire staff body by taking prisoners from the prison and getting them to work in the kitchens, work as front of house, in management, whatever it is that's needed in terms of running a restaurant. They will have prisoners working in there. Having those skills then mean that when they then leave prison, they can go off and get themselves a good job. They can go and work at a restaurant, and they have partnerships with other restaurants in the local areas to help support those people transition back into day-to-day society. Now, have a think about then, what aim of punishment could this be linked to? Again, say this one out loud for me. I'm going to reveal the answer in 3, 2, 1. This aim of punishment then would be linked to reformation, focusing on trying to make the person better. If we were to face then this as a 12 or 15 mark question, you'd have to ask, what quotations could I use? What points could I use? How could I best answer this question? And the best way you can do so is by splitting your answer into 3 different paragraphs. I'm going to see if I can move this down here at the bottom. It's not going to let me, I don't think. It is going to let me. Okay, awesome. So the conclusion should be, this idea then of which argument is more convincing. Apologies that that little toolbar is there blocking off that question, but the conclusion is literally just saying which one is more convincing. After giving one argument, giving another argument, giving plenty of points, plenty of evidence, and evaluating, you're going to be able to create a really strong argument. Now, one thing that people try and shy away from in one of their paragraphs, obviously one of them has to speak about the topic in the question. So one of your paragraphs has to be on reformation. Your other paragraph could be on deterrence. It could be on retribution, but it can also be on both. You don't need to just single out one idea. And what you could even do in that situation is add an extra bit of evaluation saying this one's actually stronger than the one previous for these reasons. And make sure when you give that evaluation, you give those reasonings. Now, I have created a somewhat miniature version of a paragraph. I've given you a point, a bit of evidence, a bit of an explanation, and a bit of evaluation, just to give you a rough idea as to what these should look like. Now, obviously, you're going to include more points, more evidence, more explains per paragraph. So this isn't a complete one, but this hopefully should show you exactly what you should be doing. I'm going to give you an opportunity now to copy that one down. And then I challenge you to go and have a go at answering this question yourself. See if you can have two sides of the argument that are fairly balanced with that conclusion. Which one is strongest? Remember, you can recycle points in your conclusion. It does not need to be something original. You can recycle throughout your answer. If you've used quotations in a previous question, you can use them again for this 12 marker. The one thing that I would say though is please do not try and use the same quotation in different paragraphs within the same answer. You will not be credited with doing anything different to what you have already done. Hopefully this has been really helpful for you guys. If you do want any more stuff on crime and punishment, let me know by putting a comment in the community page or sending me a direct message or even putting a comment onto this video. Have a go at this question, as I said, and if you have any requests, please do let me know. The next lesson will be on social justice, and then after that you will also have a family relationship lesson coming soon. Thank you very much guys, and I will see you in the next one.